to call to order the Planning Commission Citizen Advisory Committee, City of Lowell, for our regular meeting of Monday, January 10th, 2022. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sue, roll call, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Here.
Commissioner Chambers.
Here.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yep.
Commissioner Gadula.
Here.
Commissioner Plank.
Here.
Commissioner Schraven. Here. And Chair Barker.
Here. Thank you. Our next bit of business is election of officers and organization of our Planning Commission itself, meeting dates, that sort of thing. Is there any nominations for the chair position?
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Bruce.
I'll second that.
Are there any other nominations? Sue, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yes.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank. Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes, thank you very much. Vice Chair, I would like to nominate Dave Cadwalder for Vice Chair.
It's a hard job.
I know.
I'll support that.
Any discussion? Sue, voice vote, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yeah.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yep.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank.
Yes.
Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes, thank you very much. Review and adoption of Planning Commission's rules and procedures. We adopted our rules and procedures, I believe, in 2016. Hasn't changed at all. Is there any discussion? Oh, well, first of all, I'll make the motion that we adopt the Planning Commission rules and procedures. Is there a second?
I'll support.
And is there any discussion? Sue, again, roll call, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yeah.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yes.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank.
Yes.
Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes. Next piece of business is our meeting dates, which basically is the second Monday of the month throughout the year. We have a work session tentatively scheduled for December 12th. I believe we had made that a regular session every year, but we'll leave it as planned as a work session. I will make the motion that we adopt the meeting dates for 2022. Is there a second?
I'll support.
And discussion? Sue, voice vote, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yes.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank.
Yes.
Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes. Next is there approval for tonight's agenda. Is there a motion, please?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
And is there a second?
I can support.
And is there discussion? Sue, voice vote, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yes.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank.
Yes.
Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes. Next, I need a motion for the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which was November 8th, 2020. That should be 2021. Regular meeting.
I'll make that motion.
And a second?
I'll support.
And discussion? Sue, voice vote, please.
Commissioner Cadwalder.
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis.
Yes.
Commissioner Gadula.
Yes.
Commissioner Plank.
Yes.
Commissioner Schraven. Yes. And Chair Barker.
Yes. This is where, if there's any public comments or communications concerning items not on the agenda. If it's on the agenda, everybody will have a chance to speak eventually. Seeing none, we will go to old business. There is no old business. New business. We have a public hearing for Benton Baker Auto Group, a rezoning request for 211 North Pleasant Avenue. I will open the public hearing now. We will hear the testimony. We'll go through it as we go through it, and eventually at some point I'll ask for public comment, and we will go through that as well. So everybody will have a chance if they want to address the commission. So having said that, is there a representative for Benton Baker here that would like to just tell us briefly in a few words what you want to do?
I'm Kyle Visker from Land and Resource Engineering, and here with Charlie from the dealership. He can speak to things as well. But in general, there was a project that they did on the south side of West Main Street recently. Through that came some questions from the bank as far as their other properties, and they said, well, this property that you have, the one that we're asking to rezone, isn't zoned properly, and we need to get it rezoned so that we can proceed with the rest of the project. And so that's how it came about, and that's what we're requesting, to have that. Right now, the property is zoned R3 residential. There's a cold storage building on the property now. And right now there aren't any plans to change that for the dealership. And so, yeah, the request is to change it to a C3 zoning, which would match the rest of the dealership's properties. And that would satisfy the bank and kind of meet what it's currently being used for.
Just kind of cleans that whole area.
Yeah. Yep.
So that building was there when you guys moved in?
Yeah, for a lot of people in town, I don't think a lot of people recognize it's actually there.
Yeah,
I've been
it's
told
all way in the back.
yeah, it's been built sometime in the 30s, 40s. I was told originally it was, for use for tractor storage and that kind of thing back in the day. This kind of came as a surprise to all of us at the dealership, at the group, from the standpoint of, we just always assumed, we all know what happens when you assume things, but that it was zoned correctly. Obviously, we're building a new facility and that requires money, so we go to the bank and request funds, and they say, well, yeah, we're fine with the money, but you got this little piece here, it's not zoned correctly. It's like, well, what are you talking about? We've used it, for X amount of years, to my knowledge, never been concerned. We utilize the property strictly for cold storage, outdated materials, equipment, that type of thing in the barn. Has no electricity or running water, that type of thing to it. And then the rest of the property is employee parking, and that's our intent. There was an initial intent, I thought of maybe possibly building a new body shop back there. That decision has been made not to do that. We're going to utilize the current existing facility and renovate that. And we'll be back talking to you guys about that, later in the summer. But the current property is just strictly, from a bank standpoint, and I guess probably, from a city standpoint, to make sure, we're staying with the rules and try to be the good, city neighbors that we are.
Is that asphalt back there?
No, it is not. At some point, we would consider it. It was like I say, the only thing we're utilizing for it right now is employee parking. And as the dealership continues to grow, and if we ever get back to where we get vehicles like we're supposed to get vehicles, it does get utilized for vehicle overflow. But unfortunately, they have not had the need of that in a couple of years. So we hope to get back there at some point.
Commissioners, any other questions? Thank you. Stand by.
Okay.
Andy, you want to go through the proposal, please?
Yes, thank you. So we prepared a staff report dated January 6th that looks at this request. As Mr. Visker said, this is a request to rezone from R3, which is a multifamily residential district, to C3, which is your general commercial, highway commercial district, which extends pretty much all the way from the railroad tracks all the way out to the city limits on the west side of town. It's basically just everything along Main Street, so it's that typical kind of commercial zoning. So as I had some conversations with the applicant and with their bank. They were asking a bunch of questions about the property, just in terms of its non-conforming status. There is, it is a legally non-conforming use there, so it's something where they have been using this property for this purpose for a long time. It would be permitted to continue that, but with non-conformities, when it's a non-conforming use, any expansion or increase in intensity of the use is generally not permitted. And when it comes to securing these kinds of things financially, if there's a catastrophic event and they can't rebuild it, that's something that again financial institutions and insurance companies also often pay attention to non-conforming issues in zoning. So, they asked about rezoning. When I was talking to them, I said, yep, that's certainly an option, and so that's kind of why we're here tonight. So when the Planning Commission evaluates these types of requests, we have 3 standards in the zoning ordinance in section 22.05, subsection A6. So it's pretty straightforward. There's just 3 standards, A, B, and C. The first standard asks if the proposed amendment is consistent with the city's master plan, or if conditions have changed significantly since the plan was adopted, if the amendment is consistent with recent development trends in the area. I'm a planner, so of course, to me, thinking about the master plan is one of the most important considerations here. Looking at the future land use map, this property is in that multifamily residential future land use category, so it's actually planned for multifamily residential uses. And with that being said, it's in an interesting location because directly to the south is a very small manufactured housing community, and then south of that, fronting Main Street, is the C3 zoning district. Then kind of diagonal from this, also having frontage on Main Street, is the other, is the rest of the Benton Baker facility on the north side. So from a planning and zoning perspective, it's kind of at this weird intersection of 2 or 3 different future land use designations. And typically, when we see those situations, the future land use map isn't always supposed to be something where just look at that designation and say, okay, that's what it has to be. When it's a guide, right? It's a somewhat generalized document, and so when you have situations where where a property shares a boundary between one or more designations on that map, it's appropriate to consider kind of going either way. So if you're right on the border between a couple of different future land use designations, you could go one way, you could go the other way in consideration of a bunch of other factors. And so that's how we view this one here. So there's a little bit of flexibility built into it, but I think it is worth considering that it's not planned for commercial use. Item B asks if the amendment is compatible with existing or future uses in the vicinity. This is another interesting aspect of this request, because to the west of this property are the Center Court apartments, which is multifamily residential again, and then to the south you have manufactured housing residential, or higher density residential. So both directly to the south and to the west you have residential zoning. To the east you have railroad tracks, and then opposite the railroad tracks is the Lowell Light and Power facility, which is I think zoned industrial, or possibly public facilities, I can't remember. So again, this is at a very interesting location in that you have multiple zoning districts, multiple uses surrounding this property. So in addition to the multifamily, the manufactured housing, the industrial use, again, you also have the existing commercial use that Ben Baker has, again, just kind of diagonal to the south use from this property. Yes.
Looking at the subject property here where it says zoning R3, in the outline there, and then to the left of that is zoning R3, is that where the apartments are?
Yes.
And then going across the railroad track, there's a zoning R3. Are there also apartments over there?
There is, I think there's just a couple of houses there, and then most of that is Lowell Light and Power, is the Chatham Street facility is the larger piece there. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And then the third standard asks if the site is capable of accommodating all of the uses allowed by the zoning change. So one of the things that's important for the Planning Commission to remember when we're looking at rezoning requests is that there aren't conditions attached to this. So it's just a simple rezoning from R3 to C3, and so when that rezoning happens, they are allowed to request, approval for any of the uses permitted in C3. in this case, we understand that, it would be used for overflow parking and some of the things that they talk about, but, conceivably, they could ask for anything permitted in C3 and come in for site plan approval or special land use approval, depending on what it was. And so thinking long-term, it's important for the planning commission to think about all of the uses that are permitted in C3, and if all of those uses might make sense on that property. And so this is, again, it's a unusual site because it has so many different things going on around all sides of it. It doesn't have frontage on Main Street, which most of your C3 properties in the city do have frontage on Main Street, but this is something where, presently, I think, with Bet & Baker utilizing this property as they, talked about during their presentation, I don't necessarily see issues with that, but it's important for the planning commission to think, more broadly than just what this one applicant is asking for, because this is a permanent change, right? It's going to be C3, forever until somebody asks to change it back to something else. And so it's important for the planning commission to kind of consider all of those ramifications as it makes its decision. So after the public hearing, the planning commission, this will be a recommendation to city council. This is not a decision you make on your own. When you do provide a recommendation, obviously city council, listens to you guys and, generally puts some stock in what you're recommending. But those are the standards, and I think it'll be important for the planning commission to kind of, like you do for site plans, kind of walk through each one and come to some consensus as to whether or not each of those are satisfied before you make a recommendation.
Can we make any recommendations conditionally?
No.
No? So it's either a yay or nay on
It is a
rezoning?
Yes. So the only way that conditions will work with rezoning is if the applicant has to offer them. But they have not done so. They have to offer them in writing. So if that is a concern of the planning commission, it is completely up to the applicant if they want to offer conditions, and they can rate them out and then submit them for your consideration at a future meeting. But at this point in time, it is a simple yes or no recommendation. Or of course you can, if you want more information, or if you want some more time to consider it and study it and all that, you can always postpone a decision until your next meeting.
Thank you, Andy. Commissioners, any questions?
Can you ask what their intentions are?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
What are your intentions for making it a C3 district?
So our intention at this point is nothing but parking and storage. That's what we've utilized it for the last 4 years. Like I say, there was some original consideration of possibly, going for commercial to, add a body shop back there. That just isn't feasible for us financially. So we're going to renovate the current facility. So from our needs standpoint, and I certainly understand, the concerns. We don't see it, changing at all. I mean, we'll keep it mowed and keep it clean and that type of thing, but we have no intention of building anything back there. And probably, I would see, that the barn is back there is probably got a less than a 10-year life cycle. So at some point, it'll come down and it really becomes just not much more of a catch-all. So quite frankly, if it went away, it really probably would actually be an improvement for us. But we have no intention of doing anything additional back there.
So it's purely for a financial standpoint for the
Yes.
bank?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, this come completely out of the blue to us. We had no clue it wasn't zoned correctly. Because we just assumed it was just fine, and I'm guessing probably many of you did too. It's just, that's the way we've always used it. Obviously Wittenbach used it for many years that way, and like I say, a lot of people don't recognize the piece of property is theirs. It's just kind of, as you mentioned, Andy, it's a weird, really weird pie-shaped piece of property from the standpoint it borders the railroad tracks, borders the lovely mobile home park, and then there is the apartments to the west, but the shrubs and grass or trees are growing up to such that you can't hardly see it.
That was going to be my question. Is there any fencing or shrubbery to particularly from the apartments and obviously from the mobile home park.
Yes, it's all natural growth. It's nothing we've planted, it's something that's been there many years. You know, there's a kind of natural border all the way around the property, with a couple additional trees in the middle of the property we mow around and that type of thing. But like I say, between us and the trailer park, there's several trees, and us and the apartment complex, there's several trees and shrubs type stuff.
Commissioners, any other questions?
So the lot that the mobile home facility is on is zoned as highway business zone?
Mobile home, I think.
What is MH? So I just reading.
Yeah, so it's zoned MHP, which is manufactured housing.
Okay.
Yep.
It says, states that uses, it says here, parcels immediately to the south and southeast are identified as highway business on the future land use. What is that?
So to the south and southeast would be their existing, Ben Baker's existing property on Main Street. That is planned and zoned for commercial activity.
So that's, I was reading that as immediately south of the parcel in question. But, okay. So it's zoned as mobile homes. I mean, now so if we close this in as like, commercial, you've got this little nub of, mobile home zoned land there. I mean, it's a strange, like, I like my maps clean, right? Not like zoning off little enclaves and stuff within there. Is there anything we're getting into there in the future? Do you rope off that little lot?
Yeah, so I mean that, you're right. So if this were to go to C3, then the manufactured housing community there would be surrounded on, almost entirely on all four sides by commercial zoning. And that is a little bit unusual. Usually there's a kind of a step back in intensity as you go from commercial off into a two-family or multi-family district, and then from there you step back again to a lower density single-family residential district. So it would be a little unusual in terms of the ramifications from that. I think I could see some concern from residents of that manufactured housing community, just because again it's the intensity of use long term. I think it's so if we say someday, 10, 15 years in the future, that maker decides to sell the stuff to somebody else and they want to build a different building and have a different use on that property. It's zone C3, so there's a bunch of stuff that's permitted by right there. And so some of those uses potentially, could maybe not, wouldn't be ideal next to a small residential neighborhood. So that's probably the biggest concern from the manufactured housing community's perspective, is that you just have potentially a lot of activity and more intense uses surrounding you than maybe you would be accustomed to. In the short term, it sounds like their plans are pretty much to maintain the status quo and continue to do what they've been doing. There are some trees and some vegetation surrounding the site on the south and to the west. It seems like most of the trees between the apartment complex and that building are on the apartment complex of the property. So the property line kind of cuts right down the middle, but most of it's probably to the west of that line. Then to the south, most of those trees are on Ben Baker's property. So again, a future developer in theory could come in, cut down all the trees, and open it all up and do something there that maybe the manufactured housing park wouldn't be too wild about. That's
If they were going to use it or make a different change of use, they would have to come before the planning.
correct. So yeah, they could, they would have to come back if they're going to build something new. At which point, if that was an issue, then you could require additional screening and fencing and landscaping like you have done for a number of other uses over the years.
And would that apply to if they take the existing building and add like water and sewer and these kinds of things?
So if they're not adding anything or doing anything to the, above ground to the building, then they wouldn't have to come back here for that. If they tear it down, they wouldn't have to come back here for that. If they added on to it, or if they, tore it down and built something else, then they would. And so that was something that, at that time, you could evaluate what the current situation is with the property, what kind of extra screening is still there. And then if that was a concern, you could, require additional landscaping or screening in those instances too.
And can we make a recommendation to the city council if we say, we're recommending an adoption, that we're also recommending that they do some landscaping, particularly with the mobile home park?
I mean, you can, but it's not going to have any
No way.
force behind it, right? It's just something as it would be nice if you did this, but without them offering to do that as a condition of rezoning, you don't really have the authority to make that an actual requirement. You can certainly suggest it and encourage it and hope that they do it, but it's hard to, we can't force their hand in this particular instance. If you had a site plan or a special land use request or something in front of you, then absolutely, then you could 100% do that. Rezonings are treated a little bit differently in the statute, and we have to be mindful of that.
I just think by the Baker, I mean, they're good neighbors. I don't foresee them ever doing anything to upset the apple cart. You upset the apple cart, those potential customers that aren't gonna come to see it.
Holy small town.
Yeah. And the new dealership, I mean, what an improvement, so I just think that eventually, if something's gonna get done, they're gonna come back and we can address some issues, but
Is there someone from the trailer park property or properties?
Well, that's the next step. Public hearing is open. Thank you, Charlie. Are there any comments from the general public? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing at this point. Commissioners, are there any further discussions from the applicant or from Andy? Any questions whatsoever?
The trail that stops up at the middle school or Cherry Creek, is that, what's proposed? I mean, are they coming through on that railroad track?
it's all still being used by King Road.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's still on the track. Well, I mean, it's active, but it's,
Yeah.
they store cars and stuff back there.
Okay.
I'll make the motion then that Benton Baker rezoning request be passed on to the city council for adoption to change their zoning from the current R3 to C3 designation for that subject property. Is there a second?
I'll support that.
And is there discussion? Hearing none, Sue, voice vote please.
Commissioner Cadwalder,
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis,
Yes.
Commissioner Padula,
Yes.
Commissioner Plank,
Yes.
Commissioner Shrabbin,
Yes.
and Chair Barker.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Next is a public hearing for Trinity Cannabis, special land use at 2125 Bose Road. And do we have Brock Kreider? Brock, you want to come on up just in just a few words, tell us basically what you want to do?
Yeah, so we plan on taking the current structure, utilizing the inside, and then constructing a new 2,800 square foot hybrid greenhouse facility.
And is it only a grow facility?
Yes, sir.
At this point, only a grow
Yes.
facility? Okay.
So you're gonna build a greenhouse, like a typical greenhouse, or like the new ones that I've seen going up down by Brighton and down by that area where they're quite tall and actually quite nice looking buildings.
Correct, yeah. It's a hybrid style, so it's a metal sides, 14-foot under gutter gable roof.
I see them all over the place now.
Thank you. Andy, you want to lead us through?
Yes, thank you. So we've done a number of these, so I think everyone is familiar with the process of going through these applications. Although this one is as Mr. Kreider said, this is a cultivation facility, specifically the Class C cultivation facility according to the application that permits up to 2,000 plants. The property itself is located at 2125 Bose. It's a 1.7 acre property, zoned general industrial. The property currently contains a building that has an area of about 3,200 square feet, and then they will be constructing an additional building, which is the greenhouse that he's talking about, behind that, and that'll have an area of 2,880 square feet. So you're not quite doubling this, the amount of buildings on the property. As we know, these marijuana facilities are permitted in the industrial district as a special use, and so we have a lot of standards to go through, as we have done many times in the past. There are a handful of items that we list on page 2 of our staff report that were not included on the site plan. Most of these are not a big concern. I would, if we get to this point, stormwater calculations will be needed due to the notable increase in impervious surface on the property. That's probably the biggest one that we would need to see. And then there's a few items that are specific to marijuana facilities that we would also ask to have submitted. So, for example, that would include a lighting plan, proposed building elevations, including materials, and then just a written narrative about accepting delivery of products, how that happens, where it's stored, how the transactions are recorded, things like that. They submitted a written narrative that's about 30 pages long that kind of describes most of the items that are required by the ordinance, and overall it's a fairly complete application. And so when we look at these facilities, as you know, we have to go through the site plan review considerations and criteria, the general special land use standards, and then the special land use standards that are specific only to adult use marijuana facilities. A couple quick comments on landscaping. So they are utilizing a site that already has a building on it, it's already parking on it, they're just kind of moving in and then expanding it. So they have not proposed any new or additional landscaping on the site. So the front yard landscaping requirements under the ordinance are 8 trees and 24 shrubs. They're not shown on the plan. There are also no changes proposed to the parking lot. There's only 5 spaces according to the site plan right now. Because this is a cultivation facility, there's probably not going to be a huge number of customers and vehicular traffic that we would ordinarily see from like a retailer, as we talked about in the past. But that would be something that you can and should discuss with the applicant to make sure that their expected parking generation aligns with what they have shown on their site plan. Signage is not shown on the site plan. It doesn't have to be signage, of course, but just if they're going to have one, there are standards in the ordinance in terms of the size, location, things like that, and so we'll need to make sure that that is compliant with the ordinance. They have submitted a letter indicating pre-qualification status, and as always, they are also required to have an operating license from the city. So every marijuana establishment requires special land use approval from the planning commission, and then an operating license is issued at the end of all of this once they have everything turned in. Are there questions at this point? And then, Mr. Chairman, my question for you is: do you want to kind of proceed through all the site plan review standards at once?
Yes, we'll go through the site plan review standards A through F, and then we'll follow similar format, and we will do public hearing after each segment, and then in the technical school.
Other questions? Is everybody good?
We're going to go through about 6 standards here, A through F, and then once we do that, stop and I'll ask for public questions, commissioner questions, obviously, and then we'll take a voice vote on that. And then we'll go to the next set of standards. And this happens about 3 or 4 times. Three.
So the first set of standards that we're going to talk about are the site plan review standards. So these are standards that relate primarily to the design and the arrangement of buildings on the property. So with that, the first standard A talks about the uses not affecting the public health, safety, or welfare. The structure shall be planned to take into account topography, size of the property, uses on adjoining property, etc. So as we mentioned, there's an existing building on the property. The additional greenhouse, you're obviously increasing by quite a bit the overall capacity of the site in terms of how much cultivation you can do there. There's a 6-foot fence proposed around the back that would contain the greenhouse. So this is in an industrial area. There's not too much development immediately around it. There are other industrial and commercially zoned properties. For the most part, there's a couple of residences nearby, but by and large, this isn't like an intense neighborhood or anything. Although there may be some concerns as far as that is concerned. Item B talks about safe, convenient, uncongested, and well-defined vehicular and pedestrian circulation shall be provided. So they're proposing to retain the existing curb cut on the site, and they're not proposing any other changes. It certainly may be necessary to have a loading area, so that's something that should be discussed, how that happens, and where specifically, there's a gate that kind of divides the new greenhouse portion in the back from the front of the building. So if there are deliveries and things like that that would require a loading space, some information about how that takes place and where would probably be helpful. Item C talks about the arrangement of public or private vehicular and pedestrian connections. So as we mentioned, the curb cut on Bose Road would be the primary point of ingress and egress. We don't have any concerns about pedestrian circulation or activity that's likely to be very minimal on the property. Item D talks about the removal or alteration of significant natural features being restricted to those areas that are necessary to develop the site. So they aren't proposing to remove any significant natural features. The area where they're going to build this greenhouse, it's pretty much just an open area behind the building. There aren't any trees or other notable natural features there to our knowledge. Item E is that satisfactory assurance shall be provided that the requirements of all other applicable ordinances, codes, and requirements of the city shall be met. That would be addressed as a condition of approval if approved. There are some questions about how much water is going to be needed on the site. Similarly, these tend to have a increased draw on electricity from low light power. So certainly things you'll need to take into consideration. And then item F talks about the general purposes and spirit of this ordinance, the zoning ordinance. And the master plan of the city shall be maintained. So the master plan talks about, it shows this area in the industrial future land use category. This is an industrially zoned property, so in that sense, this is a parcel is zoned correctly. It is zoned for industrial use, and this is an industrial activity. And so we think that this is generally compatible with the city's master plan. And that concludes the site plan review standards, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andy. Commissioners, questions?
So, do you know if that's hooked in the city sewer?
No, sir, it's not.
It's not.
We're well and septic.
You want to run us down Bose,
Well, that's the other question then is, if it does run down those, they should be hooking up, correct?
because the other grow facility, so I think we should keep it standardized,
Yes.
because we don't know don't have anything that tells us the volume of water. And that-
Regardless if the lines are there, they should hook up. I mean, that's the standard that's been, we've tried to set it anyway. And also, in that same regard, and you might remind me, I can't remember, did we not require an 8-foot fence in the past? So it would be an 8-foot fence instead of a 6-foot fence.
I don't know that your ordinance allows for an 8-foot. I'd have to double
I
check.
think it's recommended 6 to 8.
I think we did an 8-foot fence for the Admiral Warehouse Grow Place. Not sure, but we should be consistent is what I'm saying.
Well, I just want to make sure that our city wells are right there. And I don't need our city manager informing me, because I do sit on council, that we have an issue with ground contamination. So we won Best Water Award, so when it comes to our city water, we're, pretty much trying to protect it as much as possible. So I think if the sanitary goes down Bose Road, I'd like to see the facility hook into it, because we don't know your flow numbers.
So we did have a conversation with Andy during, and the septic is quite a ways away, the sanitary is quite a ways away. In the narrative, it does explain that all of our runoff is captured, reused, and disposed to a third party offsite. So there's no leachate, no discharge onto the ground whatsoever, it's all captured. None of our plant material actually goes down to the septic, that just services the restroom.
And we'd be happy to put up an 8-foot fence. We actually recommended that in our initial plan and told that we were bring it down to 6 foot to meet code.
We haven't done one of you guys in quite a while, so we're just got knocked the rust off. But so you capture, let me see if I get this in. So the greenhouse, you're going to capture all your water, and you're going to have a company like plumbers or somebody else come in, back it out, and take it to an off-site facility.
So what happens is we have basically catch basins from all of our tables. We recapture the water, we put it through a carbon filtration system. We reuse the water to the extent possible. There might be a little bit of nutrient solvent left over, and that gets disposed to a third party.
You have that container on site?
Yeah, it's literally a 55-gallon drum. There's very little runoff with our tables.
But the point still is if they are on the water and sewer lines, they should be hooking up.
It's only like 80 feet away. It's not like it's a mile away.
Then we require if it's like within 200 feet?
Yeah. I mean,
That one place that it goes.
regardless, I'd like it determined whether or not it's there if they need to hook up or not. It just, if we're going to enforce our rules, that's what we ought to do. And same with the 8-foot fence. I'm not opposed to a 6-foot fence by any stretch, but I'm pretty sure we did an 8-foot fence around the Admiral Warehouse place that we just did not too long ago.
Let's just get the sanitary dealt with first here.
Right. I mean, eventually we need to get that information. We can delay the vote and keep on going through this, and yet we need some clarification.
Yes, so I guess there's one of two ways you could handle it. You could, postpone a decision until a future meeting when that's until that's resolved. Alternatively, you could add, again, this is thinking ahead, if you're inclined to approve this tonight, and I don't know that you are, but if you are, you could include a condition that says that they must hook up to water and sewer if that is found to be available within 200 feet of the property, consistent with, the city's ordinances, and just so we cover, because I guess the question is if they're not, so if they're, let's say, water and sewer are each 400 feet away, I don't know, Is that going to mean that you won't approve it? Or, you know, I mean, just kind of thinking through that, like if you are inclined to approve it, if it's just something where you just want to make sure that they're consistent with that regulation, you know, we could probably address that as a condition of approval and figure that out. And then just knowing what the clear direction is from the planning commission, which is you need to hook up if you're within the 200 feet that's required. And that's something we can look up pretty quickly in the next day or two and figure out and kind of go from there.
Oh, we can add that verbiage.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep.
I'm good with that.
Because if it's just a toilet, it's just any expansion, we know where it's going, it's not going to the ground, into the wells.
Yep.
Yeah, so
It's
it's,
safe,
yep.
it's for safety.
Right, and the other thing is that every time we do something out in that area, the question becomes, are they hooked up to the water and sewer? That's just, it's a standard question, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's ridiculous to have a water and sewer system and not have people hooked up. It goes right by, or, you know, within a certain distance, 200 feet. So, to me, it makes sense to do it. And I'm fine with the same conditional thing on a 6 or 8 foot fence. I'd rather see the 8 foot fence. That's my thinking on it. And we'll come back to the landscaping, right?
Yes.
In the next one.
Yep.
So we'll come back to the landscaping
Yeah,
one.
I mean, but other than if we can get that verbiage put in there, they've already said they don't have a problem putting the fence up. So.
Right. I'm okay with then making the motion that we accept the site plan review standards with those conditions.
Mr. Chairman, have you received any public comment on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we did. I'm sorry. Is there any public comment? I'm sorry. Please give us your name and address.
Craig Fomber, 827 North Washington Street. Just looking at the map, I noticed that there's a road going through the property there, and I wonder if that is an easement from the Napa, or if that's your property, how that all that works.
It's Napa's property.
It's an easement.
All right.
You made a motion.
Yep. I did. I made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll support that.
Okay, discussion. Sue, roll call vote for accepting the site plan review standards A through F.
Commissioner Cadwalder,
Yes.
Commissioner Chambers,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellis,
Yes.
Commissioner Padula,
Yes.
Commissioner Plank,
Yes.
Commissioner Shrabbin,
Yes.
and Chair Barker.
Yes. Next set is special land use review standards. Again, it's A through F, I believe. Yes, A through F.
Yep, so these are the special land use standards that apply generally to all special land uses in the city. So the first one says that the proposed special land use shall be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious and appropriate in appearance with the existing or intended character of the vicinity, that it will not change the essential character of the area in which it is located. As we talked about before, this is going to be inside. There's going to be a few changes to the exterior of the building facing Bose Road. The most notable modification of the property is going to be the addition of the greenhouse in the back, which will be surrounded by a 6-foot tall fence and flat. According to the application, the greenhouse will be entirely sealed, and